Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. If you want to know what it looks like when your state gets involved and the attorney general is doing their job and the prosecutors they're doing their jobs, we have a little taste of that because the foreperson of the grand jury in Georgia that is looking in to interference in the 2020 election is giving interviews. Well, would you look at that? Here's Ari Melber telling us about it.
We have breaking news about recommended indictments in the Georgia Trump probe. Breaking news tonight out of the criminal Trump probe in Georgia, and it sounds big. I'm going to walk it through with you. The grand jury is recommending multiple indictments, and that news tonight is from an on-the-record source. We hear a lot about leaks and sources of anonymous people and the two-source rule. What is breaking news right now is on the record. The head of that Georgia grand jury speaking out for the first time, which feeds questions and speculation tonight about who exactly is now being potentially recommended for indictment there. This is the first ever inside account of the inner workings of the Georgia grand jury. If you're thinking, well, you've heard a lot about it, you've heard about the report, we've covered it, I'm just going to tell you this once because this is the only time I'm going to say it, because this is the only time it's happened first. This is the first time we've had a grand juror speak out, and at that, the foreperson. This is the only known state criminal probe into Trump's election activities.
Not so. Michigan, sir. Michigan, the proud state of Michigan, also has a state investigation going into this.
The jury's leader, or foreperson, now today for the first time speaking out in a series of interviews, first to the AP, then to the New York Times, and it is making waves, announcing for the first time the fact that she says this grand jury recommended indictments for multiple people on a range of charges. Now, after what felt like a sudden set of print interviews, I mean, people woke up in the legal and news world today going, oh, the foreperson speaking out? The legal world, the Trump world, everyone went into overdrive, I could tell you that. And NBC's Blaine Alexander got the big TV news interview here with the foreperson, Emily Kors. Here's an excerpt of the big interview.
It's not a short list. We saw 75 people, and there are 6 pages of the report cut out, I think, if you look at the page numbers. So it's not...
So we're talking about more than a dozen people?
I would say that, yes.
Yeah.
Are these recognizable names, names that people would know?
There are certainly names that you would recognize, yes. There are names also that you might not recognize.
That's brand new, courtesy of NBC Nightly News. It is big news that over a dozen people were recommended for indictment. This is the first inside account of a process that we've been following for about 2 years to ever go public. Now, I told you I'd walk you through what this means. The legal decision over who is indicted and for what is up to the DA, Fani Willis. This is the new information we have. The New York Times also asking about whether this grand jury recommended an indictment of Donald Trump. And that same juror I just showed you gave this answer, quote, "You're not going to be shocked. It's not rocket science. You won't be too surprised." Well, I guess that depends on who you are and what you find surprising. It is a vague answer, and it appears to be an attempt to sort of answer the question without answering it. And that brings us to another facet of this story. It is odd to have these indictment recommendations leaking out like this. There are strict rules that limit what grand jurors can disclose, all of them including the foreperson. Right now in Georgia, a court is in charge of which parts of the grand jury report are released or held secret. You heard the foreperson reference that.
Yeah, I just want to be. I just want to be clear here. So I think often our media does not ask tough enough questions or probing enough questions. It annoys me that they only tend to, when they are talking to somebody who isn't rich and powerful, obviously, of course, and when doing so might actually be a bad idea. It might screw things up. So this is a piece of criticism for that interview. Don't ask the question if it would be unethical to get the answer. Don't ask the question. Who is being charged? Obviously, I'm happy about it. Obviously, she's hinting heavily there at things I want to hear. But you can't, you shouldn't do that. That said, I thought she gave a wonderfully tempered answer, because she didn't actually say anybody. Her answer was, you wouldn't be surprised. Well, there's a lot of people that could be true of. So I think it's safe, it's fine, okay. But Jesus, what if she would have been like, yeah, Donald Trump, you guys know who that is, right? Just don't, I don't know. It seems to me like a needless risk.
So there is a process question here of how and why this is coming out. Very interesting. And there's a substantive question that is even more significant, which is, are people you've heard of, as the foreperson put it, people like Mark Meadows or Rudy Giuliani, are they about to face indictments, criminal indictments? Does any of this get all the way up to Donald Trump if the not surprising culmination is those people in a co-conspiracy as co-conspirators with Trump? Or, and again, I want you always to understand exactly what we know and don't know, or is this some sort of process where people are speaking out who aren't in charge and no one will be indicted at all until and if the DA acts?
Yeah, baby. Yes, sir. Oh, boy, that is refreshing. We got more on this. Oh, we got more. I want to just let Ari go, but because it's Ari Melber. The man gives a good speech. But yes, people you might know, people you might recognize. It's not rocket science. She says, "Oh yeah, it's coming, baby. Oh, it's coming." At the end of the day, we could only dance around this for so long. There was a coup. We got to hold the people responsible for the coup responsible. We have to hold them to account. Got to do it. And as she says, it's not rocket science. We saw on television, who is responsible. Yes, we have to dot the I's. We got to cross the T's, but for God's sake, get it started in a court of law. It looks like we are well on the way. What makes me so excited about this is that Fani Willis has got to be on the cusp of making an announcement. Ooh boy. Every day I'm waking up excited, hoping like hell we're going to hear the news. Ooh baby, it's coming. And don't let up. This is the Georgia investigation. There's one going on in Michigan. There's 5 other states that could be doing the same thing. Get your attorney general on it. Cover every single base that we can. That simple. Here's with by the way, with this new information in the comments. We'll talk about it in a moment. I'd like to read through them, but in the comments, let me know. Does that change when you think the announcement from DA Willis is gonna come out? We looking at next week, maybe? I don't know. Also in the comments, hit me with this. It's Trump, right? Surely Trump. Do you think they are going to give Trump a pass or not? I'll tell you, I will be shocked no matter what the answer is. I will be shocked if it turns out you can do a coup in this country and not get charged for it. I will also be shocked if it turns out that our Justice Department finally is holding a wealthy person to account for their actions. Fascinating. Either way. Let's have a look, though. While you're typing that out, let's have a look at what Katie Tour had to say on the matter, because she had a guest who I thought brought up a very interesting point.
We have breaking news from the Associated Press and the New York Times. The forewoman in the special grand jury investigating Donald Trump's potential election interference in 2020 has given an on-the-record interview to both news organizations, telling the Times the jury recommended multiple indictments. It's not a short list, she's quoted as saying. Asked whether Donald Trump was one of them, she responded, "You're not going to be shocked. It's not rocket science." And adding, "You won't be too surprised." Joining me now is MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin. Not to guess at what she's talking about there,
yes.
But it's not so veiled.
Oh, yeah.
It's not, Katie. And she told the Associated Press this morning that she had been instructed, as had the other grand jurors, about what they could and could not say by Fulton County Superior Court Judge Robert McBurney. I wonder right now if, in reading the New York Times report, Judge McBurney believes that Emily Kohrs overstepped. She certainly was careful this morning with the Associated Press, talking about sketches she made of various witnesses, who was funny, who was unhappy to be there, who might have invoked privilege. But in telling the Times that the grand jury indeed recommended indictments and that it wouldn't be rocket science to guess who they recommended indictments against, I wonder whether she overstepped that line today.
She also tells the Times that they started in the grand jury with that call that Donald Trump made to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, where he asked Raffensperger to find the votes he needed to win that.
I just want to be clear again. I think, obviously, this person isn't, a media personality themselves. They don't have whatever training. I'm here.
State.
They don't have whatever training, but I thought she did a good job of keeping it vague enough. The point is, you can't single somebody out. She spoke in vagaries. I don't love that she was asked the question to begin with. But to say you wouldn't be surprised doesn't communicate anything that we weren't already, strongly. Let me put it like this: doesn't communicate anything to anyone who has been following this that would be a surprise. And if you do follow it, there is enough people it could possibly be that it's not the end of the world. In addition, she mentions that it's a pages long list. It's a pages long list of recommended indictments. Folks, it's going to be an interesting year.
11,708.
And my point is, with a pages long list, that's obviously many people.
80 votes, and here's what she told the Times. We definitely started with the first phone call, the call to Secretary Raffensperger that was so publicized. I will tell you that if the judge releases the recommendations, it's not going to be some giant plot twist. You probably have a fair idea of what may be on there. I'm trying very hard to say that delicately. It seems to only underscore what I asked you at the top, which is that it doesn't seem like it's so veiled.
No, it doesn't seem like it's so veiled at all. But also, I think what Ms. Kohrs might be getting at is how far-reaching this investigation was and what acts or conduct might be at issue in the grand jury's recommendations. We know from the outset that when Fani Willis started her investigation and asked for a special grand jury to be appointed, one of the things she was most interested in from the very outset was that call.
Okay, well, also, let me just interject, and I'll go back slightly so that she can... that Lisa Rubin here can give a more complete answer, or have her answer heard more completely. But also, this is a regular person who is speaking in the language of regular people. In other words, this person doesn't have their head clouded with a bunch of corporate media nonsense and doublespeak and jargon. She's at a certain point, you have to call the obvious, the obvious. At a certain point, they're talking about all these possibilities, like, oh, well, but she's not making it seem like maybe we're just going to scapegoat some random guy we've never heard of. in a law firm 3 degrees removed from Trump. She's being frank, and she's saying, well, yeah, it started with that phone call where he's pressuring the Secretary of State, trying to intimidate him. And you're not going to be surprised by who we say ought to be indicted. It's refreshing. I do love jurors because they are us. and I think you can't really fault her at all for her answers here.
And what acts or conduct might be at issue in the grand jury's recommendations. We know from the outset that when Fani Willis started her investigation and asked for a special grand jury to be appointed, one of the things she was most interested in from the very outset was that call. The investigation then expanded to include things like Lindsey Graham's call to Secretary of State Raffensperger in mid-November, and then expanded to include things like the fake electors scheme and Georgia's involvement in that, as well as accusations about the voting machines and whether or not they had been penetrated or hacked or somehow involved in the fraud. We know that the grand jury didn't buy those allegations. They say, in the now unredacted portions of the report, there was no widespread fraud that could have overturned the results of the election. But I think she's also basically saying the things you understand to be the central points of this investigation, those are indeed where we focused our energies.
You know, they also said that they believe that some of the witnesses were lying to them. That was also in what was released by that judge. And it brings me to another thing that she told the Times. Actually the Associated Press, and there was a little bit of color about how the lawyers in the room dealt with some of the witnesses' refusal to answer. And she said when witnesses refused to answer almost every question, the lawyers would engage in what Coors came to think of as a show and tell. The lawyers would show video of the person appearing on television or testifying before the U.S. House committee that investigated the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, periodically asking the witnesses to confirm certain things. Then the scratching of pens on paper could be heard as jurors tallied how many times the person invoked the Fifth Amendment. That's an interesting strategy to go at somebody who's refusing to answer.
Don't think that only presidential elections matter. Don't think that. Vote in the off years, folks. Look at what a House committee can do. Get your representatives in there. Get lefties in there. Because here we have the payoff. Yeah, they provided the opportunity for prosecutors to press the play button and have their work done for them. Excellent.
It's a very interesting strategy and a telling one. One of the ways that you might be able to tell whether someone is lying is obviously if you can contrast that with scenarios in which they told the truth. That doesn't mean someone is lying when they invoke the Fifth Amendment per se, but in order for a special grand jury to say, we believe that people lied to us, it means that they were also confronted with other evidence, Katie, that would allow them to deduce what the truth actually is. And that is as important as their finding that they believe that people lied to them, is that the investigators and lawyers from the district attorney's office likely presented them with countervailing evidence to show what that truth was, where people either clammed up or told a very different version of the story.
Also, at least one person who resisted answering questions became much more forthcoming and cooperative when prosecutors offered him immunity in front of the jurors. I know a number of people went in with immunity, but it appears at least one person got immunity while they were in that room. She says it's a him.
Man. Oh, man, I cannot wait. I cannot wait to read the full transcript if and when it becomes available. By the way, a little bit of deductive reasoning here. Maybe it's inductive, whatever. Little bit of logic can narrow it down. It's probably, whether they're famous or not, it's probably somebody in the Georgia Republican Party, as opposed to a federal level person. Why? Because immunity from crimes in Georgia. If they are testifying and being offered immunity, then they know their testimony is going to be accessible by the government no matter what. So it would have to be somebody whose testimony would not be relevant outside of Georgia. If, for example, it was Giuliani or Eastman, and they said, okay, well, I get immunity in Georgia, but then the fact that I was involved in Georgia will lead investigators to my involvement in other states. It wouldn't help them. So, yes, it's probably a Georgia-level member of, I'm going to assume, member of the Republican Party, just based off of how the rest of the January 6th committee findings panned out, which is there was in at least 7 states, by the way, good chance you're in one of them, where the Republican Party was tapped to provide false electors to try to overthrow the 2020 election. Wild.
Is there any risk with the 4 women coming out and speaking on the record like this?
You know, Katie, if this were an ordinary grand jury, I think there would be that risk. But remember also, this is a special grand jury. And as a special grand jury, it really deviates from some of the functions that grand jury would ordinarily serve in a criminal case. This grand jury does not have the power to indict. Its power is solely to investigate and then make recommendations to the district attorney. That doesn't mean that people who might find themselves the subject of indictments won't complain bitterly about the fact that Emily Kohrs gave as much color as she did to the AP and the New York Times. It's just to say that as someone who didn't have the power to indict, she's a little bit removed from what is actually going to happen in Fani Willis's case. And it remains to be seen whether that will be grounds for an actually legitimate complaint about this process.
And one of the
To be clear, it won't, because they are saying if you follow this already, you won't be surprised. It's not going to, as she just stated, I suppose. So I'll wrap it up. It doesn't affect the indictment. They've already given their recommendation, and Fani Willis is already preparing to do whatever she's going to do.
Questions I always have is, how do you find people who can be impartial in one of these settings? How do you find jurors who are not aware of what is going on out there? And she says she didn't vote in 2020. She did not know the specifics of Trump's allegations of widespread election fraud or his efforts to reverse the election. When prosecutors played the then president's phone call with Brad Raffensperger, which we talked about so much, and I can recite almost by heart, she says that was the first day she had ever heard it. The first time she had ever heard it was when it was played for the jurors on their first day to consider evidence. Really remarkable stuff. Not every.
How? The average American. Ladies and gentlemen.
Everybody is paying such close attention. Lisa Rubin, thank you very much for joining us and helping us understand this really illuminating interview from Emily Kohrs of the grand jury investigation.
Wild. It bodes well, folks. It bodes well. Man. So what can you do? Well, if you are in one of the fake elector states, for God's sake, write your attorney general. Write your state's attorney general. Tell them you want a state-level investigation. Keep hitting them. We got to get not just Trump, not just his immediate lackeys. We need to get the people at the state-level party, or rather the people at the state level who tried to overthrow democracy in the United States. We got to get them all. Do your part. Tell your attorney general that is what you want done. Also, have a beer. Assuming you don't have issues with alcohol of any sort, allergies or otherwise. Unwind, my friends, for an evening, because it would appear that the grand jury has indeed recommended that people you would know be indicted. Hell yes. I love to see it.